I'm a CFO and I'm working with an HR person and I have a bias towards HR people. So, they'd always be getting, the benefit of any doubt with me, but I'm always going to look at those numbers and I'm going to say, you're telling me X, but the financials show Y. And that kind of breaks that trust. So you want to the best that you can, understand some of the financials that they're looking at. In your HRIS, it has that data right there.
Welcome back, everybody. That clip that you just saw was from Linda Schiaffino, who is our special guest on how to build your case with HR data. Linda is an absolute pro when it comes to this topic. She is a founder and CEO of Coach Business Solutions, and we talk about everything from HR data sources and which ones industries within hourly waged workforces should actually turn to, finding metrics that leadership teams really care about at the end of the day, and how to best showcase and present those metrics and the ROI of HR initiatives and business objectives that you have set in place. Without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to build your case with HR data. To give a little context on workforce.com, Workforce is a full service HCM software company that specializes for businesses with hourly staff. So think everything from scheduling to payroll to time and attendance to HRIS and so much more. I mean, truly, that's only touching the surface. Because we work with thousands of these hourly businesses, we get a unique view into how the best companies are using HR data to build their case, as well as some of the common mistakes newcomers are actually making in HR when they try to push for these initial changes. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about what those initial changes even look like. I am joined back and better than ever with Linda Schiaffino. Linda, thank you so much for coming back on.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Linda is the CEO and founder of Coach Business Solutions. Linda has successfully and seamlessly converted a thriving corporate career as an accomplished accounting and HR expert. Coach Business Solutions is a virtual fractional CFO, controller, and HR consultancy. The specialized hybrid approach to solving business problems has earned her the nickname The Fixer. She has mastered the crucial marriage of accounting and financial and human resources worlds, coaching and mentoring business leaders on the issues that they are most concerned about. Linda is the person for this topic. I'm telling you guys, we're going to go into it. First, some housekeeping stuff. I love to offer a little mini poll question, if you will, for the comment section. I would love it if you guys dropped a comment below on what data and or metrics that you will work on implementing after watching this webinar. I'm really curious. Feel free to throw them in the comment section. I would love to hear and actually engage with you all. And also, our next webinar release is going to be on how to quickly onboard seasonal employees. So be sure to subscribe to our channel here and get notified when it's released. Awesome. Okay, we got all of that fun stuff out of the way. Linda, tell me about Coach Business Solutions and some of the work that you actually do with HR data and analytics.
Well, I appreciate that wonderful intro. It does say, the core issues of what we do at Coach Business Solutions. And yes, we are a fractional virtual CFO, controller, and HR directorship. We provide guidance on all aspects of companies' accounting, people management concerns, from compliance to profitability to growth and strategies. And in the HR data arena, we marry the goals of leadership with the details needed to support your teams comprehensively.
And then in terms of HR data, do you think it's utilized to its fullest potential in, specifically hourly wage industries?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. I would probably, for the audience here, be speaking for all of them to say that probably not. That there is a massive room for improvement. And that's where I hope we get to, with this conversation.
What do you think is the biggest challenge or hurdle that HR comes across when actually collecting and applying data?
So there are a couple. I think, first understanding what's relevant to the other constituents, the other leadership people in the company. And then, how to collect that, how to verify, and who specifically to deliver that to. There's, some training and technology that can really, overcome some of those hurdles.
Yeah, definitely. I actually feeds me perfectly into our first topic, talking a little bit about limited data access and the quality of said data. I want to point to this very first slide here. Let me quickly share my screen. Perfect. So this first slide, it's a great table that we got from the AIHR Academy talks a lot about data sources and kind of what those main data sources look like. Of course, we're seeing things like sales data, travel. These are all things that might not even apply to those in hourly wage industries. But Linda, just looking at this, can you describe some of those key steps in an effective data collection process for HR purposes and include those types of data that organizations should actually prioritize gathering?
So first, I want to very much encourage everyone to check into AIHR. They're a great source, and they are a great membership. They offer certifications, to expand those key contributions that our HR professionals, need to prioritize. But I think, overall, can't be repeated enough that accurate and relevant data must be the first focus. You've got people that either think they know more than you or do know more than you, and they're going to want to verify everything that you share. So just always, do that double checking. I think it's important. Let's define some objectives of the shared data. Again, verify and identify the sources. A lot of the HRIS systems that we have provide multiple avenues of reporting, capturing, surveys, benchmarks. So, to rely on that to create effective data collection. Determine what those data collection methods are. What is relevant to your industry, if you're food service or healthcare or other shift work. What is relevant that would be of importance to those other constituents, those partners that you have in your company? Again, data quality and, of course, security and privacy, because you're talking about people's records, whether it's financial or personal data. You want to always make sure that you're doing your best to advocate as a gatekeeper for that information.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit about relevancy and narrowing in on those. Is there a way that industries can better narrow in on what's super relevant to them and making sure that they're not kind of getting ahead of themselves and tracking all the different types of data points?
I think a key and a repeated comment you'll hear from me today is communication. Everything that we do in HR is in service to multiple departments, whether it's leadership or our personal teams or the teams themselves. So we need to understand what they need to hear that will first get their attention, bring us in as buy-in, that seat at the table, and then come back and convert that information in terms of what is going to be the quickest path to getting them that detail.
In terms of maybe more of an all-encompassing approach, what would you consider as the most valuable data sources for HR that they should turn to first and foremost?
For your analytics, definitely your payroll records,
Okay.
The constituency, the census of the employee team, the departments that they serve, and who they report up to. Again, going back to your HRIS, I can't emphasize enough the investment in a robust HRIS is high ROI on that as well. But there are industry benchmarks for both organizations and labor pools. So identifying with those groups that focus on providing that information and making it a little bit more targeted.
Okay. And then in terms of organizations actually ensuring that they have access both internally and externally, how would you recommend doing so? Because I think that there's a bit of a disconnect with HR and actually getting that initial access to these data sources that we're even seeing on the screen.
There are costs involved because if there are any memberships of any worth, there are fees that are invested in that. SHRM comes to mind, of course, HRCI. Each one of those groups, as well as others, AIHR, offer an endless stream of certifications where an HR professional could become very proficient in targeted areas. There's a growing need, and it's being provided for data analytics because as we possibly head into a recession, it's all about money. We're seeing tons of attrition. We're seeing layoffs. How can the financial leaders who are making those decisions not really destroy the labor pool? Because if you're losing people, that's a significant cost. So it's important to identify those memberships to organizations that are going to be of great service to you and to make sure that they're focused either on your particular industry and identifying those benchmarks that are going to help you fine tune that information.
It's so funny that you mentioned even the economic financial aspect. We just hosted a webinar on the 2024 economic outlook for hourly wage industries. We also talked about discrepancies between industries. So how does HR data within industries like food and beverage versus healthcare vary?
I think that there's still the biggest aspect that they're still facing is the post-COVID engagement or lack thereof.
Mm-hmm.
We've all heard those stories of healthcare workers and food service workers that are just leaving in droves. Their employee satisfaction is at rock bottom. So that's a big obstacle for some of these companies to overcome. The analytics, the KPIs that are involved in knowing what turnover is and employee satisfaction would be good indications to decide what actions to take, how quickly to take them to kind of stem the tide of losing team members. We've often seen people disengage much sooner than they actually physically leave their positions. How can we get in front of that and make sure that they're as happy as they could be, as much as we could provide, but kind of reduce that attrition rate that is very costly?
Wow, that's a good point. And the aspect of disengagement is something that is always obviously worked towards in terms of, making sure that employees are consistently engaged. And obviously, I think that ebbs and flows, and it's really hard to actually pinpoint some data points on things like engagement, mental health, even employees' work-life balance principles, what they've got. So I think that's really important to note. In terms of tools or techniques, what do you recommend for actually consolidating and analyzing this HR data more effectively, especially for companies with very limited resources?
So the challenge is always those very limited resources.
Yeah.
And the extra efforts that HR professionals always put in. And traditionally, HR professionals don't have a strong background or a tendency towards the financial analyst side of things. But there are any number of KPIs and metrics that are really standard and kind of easy to calculate in terms of, good first stepping stones to getting that information out there. From the accounting and leadership, financial leadership side of things, we love KPIs. We love metrics. That's going to get our attention because we can tie those to the financials, and that allows us to have those tools to then speak up to leadership and really bring those partnerships to bear. I think it's important, communication. Again, have some conversations with, the accounting team on whatever level. You want to bridge those reporting skill gaps to make sure that you are reporting definitely what the CFO wants to hear and will listen to. And then again, concise reporting, get to the point, make it clear, doesn't hurt to make it pretty. There's limited attention and focus paid to most HR departments. So while we have their attention, let's keep it and grab it. It does then build the relationship for the next time you want to talk to them.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. Last webinar that you were on, we talked a lot about HR having a seat at the table, right? And making sure that we're speaking the language of our CEO, COO, and CFO. So completely, it just reiterates that point exactly. We talk obviously from the HCM standpoint, from the software standpoint. That's obviously where we come from workforce.com. And we have seen a lot of stories of, clients coming on and not realizing the importance of having all of their tools in terms of their technology actually being able to communicate with each other, right? So we had a story with this brewing company called Kilowatt Brewing. They've been one of our oldest clients. We've been with them forever. And they weren't actually able to manage their absenteeism very well. They weren't able to track data on this. And it was really hard because their scheduling and their time and attendance system were separate, right? They were two different systems. It was really annoying, quite frankly, for their general managers to actually be transferring over that data and to be consolidating all and sitting down and sometimes hours on end having to actually have it so they can report it to their C-suite, to their managers, to their bosses, right? So obviously integrating the two with Workforce, it was huge for them, and actually having those analytics so easy to access. And again, consolidating that is so big, and making sure that, hey, this isn't going to take HR hours or maybe even a day or two to actually get this data pulled. It's going to take a couple of minutes. And that's exactly, some of the tools that we have in our tool belt with Workforce. In terms of some examples that you might have, what are some organizations that have actually successfully applied HR data to improve their practices? And what are some of those key takeaways from the experience, if you can pinpoint a couple?
So, a couple of pretty well-known names in our world do a very good job of spending that time and resources on their HR departments, on their human capital departments. And they've learned some lessons that hopefully will, trickle down to the general population. And one of them was Google. They utilize, as we might expect, HR data very extensively. They were engaging with employee service surveys. They were also utilizing their annual peer performance review feedback to understand, what's the psychology? What is the happiness level of their employees, and how would that relate to dollars and cents? And they found that higher psychological satisfaction on these employees related to safety, whether it was actually physical safety on site, those warehouse workers that are working so hard with the equipment and the machinery, to personal satisfaction and safety of their own position, and especially in light of the rampant layoffs that are going on. How safe do I feel that I'm going to keep my job? And they performed better, which is of no surprise. They encouraged their managers to be more supportive, and that resulted in higher retention and productivity. And they really trained their managers on encouraging open communication and feedback, so that cycle of information is always going and always providing that information to continually improve. IBM, they were seeing an attrition problem. Then they did some surveying, and they understood that their employees were really concerned about their career development. Were there opportunities for them to grow? They understood that these employees were concerned about that and were probably looking to leave for better positions. And so they really dove into developing career paths for their employees. And especially as younger generations join the workforce, that's a focus. It should always be a focus, but it's a strong focus for them. What is my path? And what are you going to do as a company to support that path? And I'm going to stick around, and it's going to have, some really reduced turnover. They felt like they were listened to, especially from, a major corporation like IBM. And there were also targeted interventions. If they saw, specific department or an employee really in trouble, they were taking the time to dive into that and understand what was troubling that employee and how they could fix it. So that investment of time had a real strong ROI for them. And Netflix, another one on the performance review, they showed that what they had as a corporate culture was not being reflected in what they were hearing back on the performance reviews. So they moved from formal evaluations to just ongoing feedback and communication, and that significantly resulted in significant improved compensation for the employees. So nothing catches an employee's attention more than a bigger paycheck.
Absolutely. We talked a little bit about some leading metrics, some lagging, looking at turnover, all that good stuff. It perfectly feeds us into our next section on HR metrics that leadership actually cares about. So looking at this next slide we got here, we have this great article from Forbes on top 10 essential HR metrics in 2023. Linda, my question for you is, what are the key HR metrics that organizations should actually focus on? And, taking from any of these, would you agree with Forbes's top 10 list? What do you think?
I think it's a very strong list. I think as an HR professional, if I were to look at that, I might be a little put off because it's a lot of work there.
Yes.
And what you have to understand is that, okay, what is the actual algebraic computation of cost per hire? So someone's got to tell you what that is, right? So, and it's usually, if you're looking at employee turnover, the actual numbers are the numbers of employees left and who have left, and then the average employees. So it's all a percentage of the actual numbers. You can calculate how many employees do we have, how many have left, and what's the percentage of that. Quality of hire, that's a tricky one. You'd really have to you'd try to find the numbers that would identify the details behind that. Absenteeism, key, right? What are the total days absent against the total work days? And that's, a percentage right there. Employee turnover rate, again, very strong. Salary averages, you would want to benchmark those against industry and labor standards. And diversity ratios, very easy, right? What is your census? The challenge is in the security and the confidentiality of collecting the details about that ratio.
In terms of translating, some of these metrics into terms that resonate with bigger, KPIs, business objectives, or whatever you want to call it, or even the goals of the organization, how can HR do that? How can they actually translate those metrics into things that are a little bit more digestible?
I think a key starting point, again, starting, with that conversation with the CFO and your COOs. What is relevant to them? What makes sense to them? What will tell them what they need to do in order to be better at their jobs? You want to always start with cost to the organization, and the COO is not exempt from that. They're also being held accountable for cost. You want to do some productive analyses. You want to capture all the information so that your impact is strong and is targeted. You want to use common business language. You don't want to use the acronyms that we're so fond of in the HR world. Mm-hmm. You want to do some translation. What do some of these, acronyms mean? And then when you start hearing them use them, you've really made some progress there. Some of them, your ROI, your cost per employee, your risk analysis, when you're talking about injuries and safety, those are big things. Larger organizations are OSHA compliant, so they want to know, where are you getting that information? You want to tie your metrics to KPIs, to benchmarks, and you want to do some cost benefit analysis as well. And more importantly, you want to tell the story. You want to trigger that human aspect, because that usually translates, to employee satisfaction, and that always translates to customer success and satisfaction.
I love that. I think it's so important, to even break it down in that smaller sense on not using any acronyms or crazy things that are going to just go over, not to say that your C-suite wouldn't understand it, but sometimes those things can go over people's heads. And it's really important. Again, when we're talking about translation, we could even mean the basics of just spelling it out and making sure that, hey, this is how we got to this metric. This is why we're measuring this metric. And this is how we're measuring this metric. And I think it's so important to, again, just break it down and really explain the reasoning on why we're, calculating absenteeism rate, one of the more basic ones, right? In terms of best practices for actually presenting HR data and metrics visually to make it more understandable, how would you do so if you were, HR presenting to a leadership team?
Well, I think, one skill that is important for all of us, HR, CFO, nurse, doctor, teacher, just as a human being, is to really develop our emotional intelligence, our EQ. Mm. And one important part of that, in my opinion, in my studies of EQ, is to, know your audience. Try to understand the needs of the other person, how they're going to hear you, how you want them to hear you. And you'll never go wrong if you're taking that approach. In knowing your audience, you usually, you speak their language. So back to the, the acronyms. I'm not going to throw those, ERTC, PPP, numbers around. Because maybe they've forgotten what those mean or what they really mean, and that doesn't apply to me, that type of a thing. So people start, to tune that out if you're not really speaking the language that they use. How you can pick up on that is just, listening to them. What are some of the things that they say in, company communications or, newsletters, just trying to understand how they speak, because that's about winning people over. You'll be on their side and they'll feel that from you. On the financial end, you always want to be presenting quantifiable, verifiable, and accurate data.
Yes.
If I'm a CFO and I'm working with an HR person and I have a bias towards HR people, so, they'd always be getting, the benefit of any doubt with me, but I'm always going to look at those numbers and I'm going to say, you're telling me X, but the financials show why.
Mhm.
And that kind of breaks that trust. So you want to the best that you can, understand some of the financials that they're looking at. In your HRIS, it has that data right there. So
Yeah.
it's going to give you that information, and it's going to help you at least have that raw data so that you can tweak it and make it look more available to the person you're trying to speak to.
We actually have a feature on the data analytics platform side of things where it's all graphs, it's all tables, and it pulls directly, of course, from whether you're reporting on labor expenditure, whether you're reporting on absenteeism rate, whatever it might be. It actually has these data points up front and center. So we have had stories of, specifically I'm thinking of this healthcare company where the manager, their business manager, would literally go up and present, pretty much share their screen on the workforce.com desktop. And it would just be right there, all of the data pretty much accumulated, easy for her to just be like, here are the numbers, and we know that they're accurate, for those who are in the CFO world, who are working on the finance aspect of it. We know that they're accurate because it's tied in with everything and it's already all accounted for. This is all based off clock in, clock out, whatever it might be. And I think it's so smart just to have that as almost like a pre-made slide deck, right? And I think having that visual component, having those tables, those graphs, whatever it is, and having that already made for you with an HRIS, HCM system, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. How can HR teams demonstrate the ongoing value of HR metrics, and what do those strategies, what strategies can actually be employed to adapt to changing business needs and priorities?
Well, I think, just to touch upon what you just said about that specific business manager,
Yeah.
a little bit, dipping into the ROI. If I'm the CFO and I know what our cost for that HRIS is,
Mhm.
and I'm looking for, cost cutting, and I'm thinking, well, what does that really provide? That business manager was very savvy in pulling that up. It helped her because she really didn't have to, or he didn't have to, really do a lot of heavy lifting there. But it just proved right there on live basis. Once you run a payroll, your data is right there, that this system is presenting some relevant data, is customizable. Maybe we could add a couple of reports that make more sense to that particular company or industry. But right there, just pulling it up was kind of a genius move, because he or she proved the worth of that program. And I think that is something that is a good tool for the HR professionals to use moving forward.
Absolutely.
In terms of, demonstrating the value of HR metrics and some strategies, I've said it before, I'll say it again, stay connected to that
Yeah.
CFO, to that COO. You want to be attentive. You want to hear what they're saying. You want to hear maybe what their pain points are, what their challenges are. To the extent that you can, access to financials, if the company makes, some of them public, will help in making sure that the information you're sharing aligns with what they're seeing. And then it'll allow you to adjust the reporting so that, that's a skill that you would be able to really bring those other team members in, because we tend to work in silos in most companies. And that's where things start to break down, because we think we're, on an island of our own, and obviously we can't be.
Yeah.
And then that just really feeds into, the importance of storytelling, right? HR can be boring to people who aren't in love with HR. We know how important it is. So how do we, again, understand what's the story they want to hear? And then formulating that so that we're always engaging them and keeping them on our side of the table.
Absolutely. I love that. The aspect of storytelling is very, very important, especially when we're talking about quantitative data, data dealing with numbers, right? It's kind of hard to create a story around something like that, but it can be done. If HR can do it, I'm sure it can be done.
Exactly.
In terms of showcasing ROI of HR initiatives, we kind of touched on this, right? And the importance of doing so. But really quick, I actually want to backtrack a little bit. What is the difference between metrics and KPI, first and foremost?
So KPIs are key performance indicators, and they try to focus on key strategy goals of the company. So that becomes important, and it becomes crucial to have that background. What are the strategy goals of the company? Hopefully they've shared them so that everyone's on board. Everybody's pulling in the right direction. But the KPIs will measure the performance against those key strategy goals. whereas metrics measure the performance for specific operational business activities. The line does tend to blur. You'll hear a lot of people say KPIs when they're talking about metrics. In my opinion, yes, you could really, dissect it down to what the specific definitions are, but it's all in the analysis and what is relevant to people so that they get the information they need to make the right decisions. And again, you always want to be working with those other leaders, CFO and COO, what's important to them, whether you call it a KPI or not, or a metric. They want those numbers. They want those results. Most of our ERPs are now really pulling in just some dictated dashboard KPIs that are live. And then I know NetSuite is one of them. You establish the KPI and you're seeing it every day. It's not waiting for a month-end report or a quarter-end report. You're seeing it every day. And they do bridge all sorts of aspects, whether it's financial, HR, or operational. So there is a lot of emphasis that should be placed on the tools that you set up and customize in order to make your lives easier.
Most definitely. I think it's really interesting to kind of look at KPIs as the goals that almost are speaking to the entire company, no matter what team, what department. It is something that encompasses the whole organization, theoretically. And I think when we're talking about presenting our metrics, our HR metrics, our HR data to others in the organization, to leadership, it's really important to actually connect it to those KPIs, right? And I think that really gets in CEO, CFO, COO's ears in terms of they're able to relate to that, right? So I think that is such a great point. Looking at this next slide here, if I can pull it up, there we go. This is from an awesome article on LinkedIn, and it's talking about determining your KPIs and actually building those out. I think, again, this first one has a really good point in identifying those business goals. The second point is identify what the department needs to achieve in order to support the business goals. Again, this goes back to exactly what I was just saying. When we're talking about presenting our HR data and metrics, linking it back to those overall business objectives. And number 3, establish the performance goals. Linda, my question for you is, what are the KPIs that HR should actually track to measure the success of their programs?
I think turnover rate is important. Absentee rate is important, especially for shift and hourly workers. Can they identify a specific shift or department that is suffering, and what to do about that and how to fix that? Typically, the night shift workers are a special breed. That's a group of people that would really need some good attention to make sure that they're happy, they're safe, and that they will stay. Because in those industries, you do have a bigger challenge in hiring for those areas. Employee satisfaction could be a little slippery to try and analyze, but those employee surveys are important. You always want to make sure they're anonymous, because I've had too many examples of companies that they say they're anonymous, but there's always a way. If you pay a little extra, you can actually get the detail. And in some departments, if there are only 1 or 2 people, you could pretty much identify who those people are. So they're going to be a lot more reticent in being honest. And it really is key that you get some honest feedback from the employees. There's, any number of, salary benchmarks against industry and against the needs of, the company to be profitable that are important. I think you'd start with those, and then you develop a program after that, because once you present those to the leadership, the C-suite, they're likely to have some questions to say, well, what about this? What about that? Mm-hmm. And as most of these things are just related to numbers, it's just simple algebra where you can just calculate it and give them some information to say, this is our percentage. Analyze it against some benchmarks, some industry benchmarks that you're able to find, and say, we stand at 50% of our industry or 90% of our industry. That then translates into some really good employee PR where you could share that information. The surveys also provide that information. And we all know of all these localities that are running top workplace awards. There are some KPIs that are required in order for those companies to be considered for that. That's a badge of honor for these companies, and the KPIs support the the application of that.
I love the aspect of kind of working backwards from, instead of saying, all right, we got these programs in place, let's measure the KPIs, and then going from there, instead actually maybe looking at your KPIs, looking at your metrics, and then evaluating what programs might need or might not need, whatever, change is necessary there. So we had a webinar on how to design a retention strategy for hourly staff. And we had on a really great guest. Her name's Margaret Jackson, and she talked a lot about, not necessarily working harder, but smarter, right? And doing exactly that and making sure, hey, are we hitting the mark? If not, what can we do to improve? And she says she constantly is updating her retention strategy every month maybe. And it is, I think that's so smart, because again, it's so important that we're constantly reevaluating and making sure that we're consistently hitting the mark on whatever the program's goal is at the end of the day.
And the employees see that right away. If they see that there is a targeted approach to retaining, the current work staff, there's a trickle down effect that is almost immeasurable, except that you could measure it by, retention. But it brings the team together, and we really need that in order to just, be stable and profitable.
And I think for those who the program's impacting, those who are actually on the front lines, who are, running the store floor or whatever it might be, they're feeling those changes that you're making. I would like to think it really does keep things from kind of going a little bit stale in terms of, all right, day in, day out, and said, hey, there's some changes, there's some ebbs and flows to whatever the program might be in this case. There's always something to kind of be cognizant of. And I think that keeps frontline staff on their toes in a great way, in a very good way. In terms of evaluating, multiple HR initiatives or programs that we've got, what are the best ways to compare their ROI and actually prioritize them accordingly, especially if they have different timeframes or even objectives at the end of the day?
That could be tricky. And again, the communication is key here, because there may be timing differences that you may not be aware of. The CFO has, actually, quarterly reporting, et cetera, monthly reporting. The COO might have, some operational reporting that is off cycle. So understanding what their needs are without, really doubling your workload. We want to try and make sure the HR professionals are taken care of and paid attention to as well. But I think you never go wrong by aligning with the corporate and leadership objectives. Most companies are issuing their mission statements, their vision statements. Maybe have a chat with those that have created those statements and, get a little bit of, what does that mean to, the rank and file? Because it may be over their heads. Maybe that those mission and vision statements are speaking to external parties and not so much internal. So understanding. What are their intentions with issuing these statements, and do they really live them on a daily basis? Because people will see that if they don't. Prioritize accordingly to that, and then organize the data collection so that, the reporting is short cycled. Again, we don't want to belabor these things. If someone's asking for some data, we don't want to give them 3 months ago. And we also don't want to take that long in order to get that to them. So there might be there's a lot of teamwork that has to go on with, the accounting team. And a lot of times, HR is not at the table when financials are shared. So there's something that we don't know that we need to know in order to provide, the right information. So, either ask, exposure to that information or a little bit about it, and just say, I need this in order to give you what you need that's going to make you successful. What do you feel comfortable sharing? And, how much can I use of that to share the information?
In terms of timelines, is there a timeline that maybe HR should match or kind of latch onto to maybe get their point across better, or, get some more data out of? Is there anything like that you would recommend?
I think it's, particular to the company and the industry. For public corporations, it's, 3 days after month end. But they need to be putting the tools and support in place to be able to capture that information quickly. There's, whether it's quarterly, again, understanding the needs of the C-suite. How often do they need to present this information? How much time do they need to digest it and own it and really appreciate the value of it? And, what are their timelines? We work on, in HR, we work on, a payroll cycle, right? So we have information. And then, of course, there's a year-end cycle, W-2s, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
There are deadlines for when this information has to be in and complete and accurate without, additional costs for, corrections. So those cycles are a little bit broader and they're really set. Everyone knows when payday is. Everyone knows what the pay cycle is. So they understand their cycles, their needs, and work accordingly with them. And I have to encourage, don't be afraid to ask questions. I think it's never a lost art to say, I don't know the answer to this question, but I want to learn because I want to be able to give you what you need. I've never had somebody, say that to me where I was dismissive or thought less of them. I would lean into it because it showed an interest and it showed a great bridge to a partnership with that team.
I love that. I think, again, talking about communication, it goes the same for HR, right? We really need to make sure that we're communicating, we're asking those questions, and we're getting the data that, quite frankly, we don't get all the time, but we deserve very much so. So I love that. I think that's awesome. In terms of continuously assessing, we kind of talked a little bit about the previous webinar on, Margaret Jackson. She is constantly reassessing her retention program in terms of assessing and improving the ROI of HR initiatives. How often do you recommend that? And, how can actually they ensure that they're doing that as a team within leadership even?
I think that, being proactive and preemptive is always going to be key. Again, understanding the needs of, your constituents, but also if you're seeing a trend that is concerning or positive, if things are going really well, maybe more than you had even anticipated, jump on that cycle because, nobody loves bad news, but they don't want to be surprised. And if there's good news, we always want to hear it as soon as we can. So, being preemptive and ready will always poise HR professionals very well.
Absolutely. To close out, I would love to hear 1 or 2 top tips, actions, or takeaways that our audience can leave with to better build their case with HR data. I
know I've said this a lot. Direct communication with leadership is absolutely key. So, hopefully we have that opportunity. Hopefully they're open to it, the people on the other side of the table, to understanding that giving a little will get a lot for them. The numbers, may not be available to them, or maybe they don't understand them, but understanding, what is the relevant data and then providing it timely and accurate. Those are 2 words that financial leaders are always looking for, verifiable. And then you want to organize your thoughts on that relevant data. You want to research and you want to practice till perfect. And bringing that other team member on board, like, what do they think of this? This is what I came up with. Does it ring true for you? Does it provide any information that is relevant to you? And if not, what can I do to tweak it? Because it's your relationship building. And in doing that, you're doing a world of good for the respect of the HR department, because it stops becoming the principal's office. It stops becoming just the payroll desk, and it really does lean into that human aspect. And we can't run companies without humans, not yet. So we need to make sure that we're protecting all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Linda, thank you so much for coming on. I so appreciate it. This has been super insightful, super informational. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did too. To our audience, if you guys have any questions, again, comment below. I would love to engage with you all. Happy to send those over to Linda as well. Until next time, guys, again, feel free to subscribe. You will get notified when we have a new webinar release or any other awesome content coming your way. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I will see you guys soon. Bye, everybody.